Welcome to the February edition of the Tempo Storm Shadowverse Meta Snapshot. The 10 Omens are not new, and we all knew the rest of them were coming. We just did not expect them to show up this early. Cygames reworked the game's release schedule and released the mini expansion a few weeks earlier than usual. Along with the expedited release, each class received an additional silver adherent card on top of the usual gold and legendary. 2 legendary and 2 gold cards are also included, a significant increase from the usual mini expansion quota of having only a single new gold card. As the adherents are themed after their respective omens, these cards often form a synergy with each other and can be used as a package to an archetype. Dragoncraft, for example, received Galmu, Ardent Torch, and Adherent of Ardor, all 3 cards synergizing with each other and supporting the Burn Dragon archetype, bumping up its power and replacing Buff Dragon as the most popular Dragoncraft deck at the moment. Before we explore the meta in detail, remember to like and subscribe to our Tempo Strategy YouTube channel for the latest decks and strategy content. Sekka Forest has remained as the top deck in this month's Shadowverse Meta Snapshot, with no inclusion of any new cards from the mini expansion. The deck has now included the Latika package to form a hybrid with 1 copy of Walder, 3 Fairy Sluggers, and 3 Latika Verdant Claw. It sacrifices some aggro potential and instead provides an alternative win condition with the Latika OTK. And not only does the deck trade blows with Evo Shadow, it even gained a handful of very favorable matchups in the Tier 2 spectrum, such as the matchups against Heelhaven and Evo Rune, though it still succumbs to the chaos that is Whims Rune. Coming in second is Evo Shadow, and just like Sekka Forest, the deck does not utilize any of the new cards from the mini expansion. However, Jupiter has been recently included in Evo Shadow as a means to help out in the matchup against Sekka Forest, which is generally pretty even. While Evo Shadow in general has less polarized matchups compared to Sekka Forest, it is still positive to even across the whole Tier 1 and 2 spectrum. The first of the newly supported archetypes, Burn Dragon, places at the top of Tier 2 in this month's Meta Snapshot. The new Galmu, Ardent Torch, and Adherent of Ardor is just what Rowan needed to be a contender for a top deck. While the deck may not be able to ramp consistently, once it does hit Overflow, it can begin to pressure the opponent's life total aggressively. Matchup-wise, Burn Dragon shares a similar spread to Evo Shadow, and it only slightly loses out in the head-to-head. Be sure to check out Noir's guide on Burn Dragon for in-depth coverage on the deck. So up next would be Whims Rune, whose sole purpose of existence is to ruin well-planned-out combos. We questioned if Cygames would continue to support a deck with such a chaotic nature. They answered by introducing Ryo, a card that fits perfectly into a Whims of Chaos-centric deck. While up-and-coming aggressive decks such as Burn Dragon make it difficult for Whims Rune to play Whims of Chaos safely on turn 5, the deck is still very powerful against Sekka Forest, the current top deck of the meta. This justifies Whims Rune's number 2 spot in this month's Tier 2 list. The transformation of Marwyn has shown us that nothing is impossible if you work out every day like during the COVID lockdown. Side by side with Bellerophon, the familiar heal while dealing damage control style of play has returned in the form of Heelhaven. As a deck with enough healing to realistically see turn 10, Jilnalise Ravenous Craving is added to help close out the game. Unfortunately for Heelhaven, all the heals in the world would not be enough against Sekka Forest, which can combo down the Haven player in a single turn. It also has a pretty terrible matchup against Whims Rune, but putting those 2 terrible matchups aside, Heelhaven is even against other popular decks, such as Evo Shadow and Burn Dragon, solidifying its 3rd spot in the Tier 2 list of this month's Meta Snapshot. As both Sekka Forest and Evo Shadow continue to dominate the meta, they are the obvious go-to decks for laddering. Sekka Forest, while suffering from the kryptonite that is Whims Rune, is stronger against the rest of the Tier 2 spectrum. Evo Shadow is a lot more well-rounded, but it has less polarized matchups that are highly favorable. Both decks do require a degree of mastery to pilot, but by now, most veterans should already have the fundamentals secured. For those of you who may have a little bit less confidence in your abilities and prefer quicker games on ladder, Burn Dragon is the perfect laddering deck. Finally, Whims Rune is still a very solid option in days when everyone on ladder is playing Sekka Forest, as Whims Rune versus Sekka Forest is one of the most one-sided matchups currently in the meta. The synergistic nature of the Omen packages makes for a great design, as they have clear upsides and downsides. While not all while the Omens are seeing play, they lay the necessary groundwork for their various archetypes for the future. Swordcraft, for example, is close to being very strong, but for now it will have to remain near the bottom of Tier 3. Despite an expanded card pool and the mini expansion, the meta may still feel rather familiar to players. That is because both Sekka Forest and Evo Shadow simply belong to a tier above the other decks in the meta, and they are able to do so without the need to utilize any of the new cards from the mini expansion. As it turns out, dealing critical damage to your opponent as early as turn 6 is just very strong, even if other classes receive more tools to synergize various archetypes. We will have to wait and see if Cygames decides to refresh the meta as we enter the final month of the expansion with another meta-changing balance patch. After all, the third month of the expansion may end up to be pretty dull and uneventful compared to the first 2 months. What is not dull and uneventful is the return of the Shadowverse Open tournaments. Remember to sign up at svo.gg for a chance to prove yourself and beat one of our Meta Snapshot writers. For now, be sure to check out the Shadowverse section of TempoStorm.com frequently for our latest guides and articles. We'll see you next time.